Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. As Gary was saying, I'm Jon Denly from GBST. We use GWT for several different applications, sort of large enterprise applications. As you can tell, I'm in the finance industry. So I'm just going to describe a little bit about our technology, our architecture, and some of the challenges we've had, and things that have happened. So yeah, excuse this slide, this comes straight out of our financial report, so it's rather dry. But the GBST are a provider of technology to the finance industry. We cover wealth management, equities trading. Our clients tend to be banks or fund managers, that kind of stuff. So we're talking sort of large database-based, what you'd probably call a legacy app. But yeah, these sort of very large, slow-moving organisations. And yeah, we're in Europe, Asia, and Australia as well. I'm actually from wealth management, which is originally called Infocomp, a separate company that got bought by GBST a couple of years ago now. So we're the wealth management arm of GBST. So actually I might just cover some of the other technologies. So we've got 3 different products within GBST that use Google Web Toolkit. So the one I worked on is, or I'm currently working on, is Composer Web, which links into a back office system called Composer, which is used for fund managers for wealth management. So if you've got a pension with Suncorp or some of the other big banks, BT, places like that, your pension actually lives in our system. So I know how much you have in your pension, which is great. And we also have Front Office, which is a advisor desktop for broking systems. This is used by equity traders. That's also based in Australia. And then SIN, which is a similar equities trading platform, which is UK-based, which is actually another acquisition by GBST. So all 3 of those products have got GWT-based front ends. Quite different architectures underneath, but I'm only really going to cover Composer Web because, frankly, I don't know a lot about the other ones. But we'll see how we go. So this is a screenshot from Composer Web from probably about a year ago now. Oh no, that was taken the other day. So this is actually an advisor desktop for financial planners in the UK. So this is sorry? Oh, I do, yeah. Should I remove that from my pocket? It's conveniently in the same pocket as that as well. Oh. All right. So this is for advisors in the UK. So you're kind of a financial planner sort of person when you get your pension. And they help you set it up and they review it and what have you. So this is showing just the basic advisor desktop. So it's a fairly standard looking web application really. We don't do anything too flashy. But this is all based on GWT. So all of this data here is coming from our back office system, and I'll talk a bit more about the connections with the back office in a minute. And it allows you to do things like view your current investments across the whole platform, transact on things. So advisors can actually pay more money in, set up regular withdrawals, do balance inquiries. Investors themselves can also access it, currently only read-only, but we're currently improving that so they can do transactional access as well. And it's all SDP, which is the sort of obsession in the finance industry to have everything straight through processing, so you don't have to have loads of people keying data in, because you'd be amazed at the number of places where you send in an application and some poor sucker has to key it into a back office system. So this is actually full SDP, which a lot of people get excited about. But so it's supporting that. I should probably mention as well that initial development started in 2008 on this product, hence the look and feel. And it was actually went live originally in December 2009. So that was using GWT version 1.4. We're now on 2.4, so it's been going on for a while, and we've been pushing out updates since 2008, and we're doing a large update at the moment to improve the functionality. So I'll cover a bit of the general architecture just at a high level. So at the bottom here you can actually see Composer, which is it's a large Sybase database. This is traditionally the product started as just a large database it's just a client-server app at the bottom there. The thing that you can see called CBiz on top of that is an integration layer. It's Java-based, so it's a Spring application. It just provides web services support basically to the database underneath. That has scheduling and a few other things in there. And then Composer Web at the top actually doesn't talk to the database directly, it goes through this CBiz tier. CBiz itself is stateless, so you can actually just deploy as many versions of that as you want. So all of the state is in this database at the back end. And the way this architecture is designed here is to actually allow the front end to continue running when the back end database is offline. So you can see there's 2 copies of it, with database replication pushing from the writable copy into the read-only copy, which is just for the web. And then updates come back via this SOAP over JMS connection. So the asynchronous updates there, and then they get replicated across. This means if they need to take the read-write database offline for maintenance or for any other reason, the web will continue to function. So people can still view their balances, they just don't get updated. The other thing that you'll notice at the top there is the Composer Web database, which is accessed directly from the Composer Web server via GWT, so no SOAP or anything there. And that's that holds the state of things in the web. So if you're halfway through an application, so you're essentially filling out a series of forms, it's holding the state in that database there, and that's really the back of the Composer Web application itself. And we're just using GWT RPC to the browser. We're not using any of the newer sort of technologies because they didn't exist when we started. So yeah, that's the basic sort of physical layout of it. Logically, I've left a few things off here because I was trying to draw it up today and it was quite difficult. It's become a bit of a mess actually. So the important things here are that the RPC layer that you can see there actually spans the entire application right up to the client. So it's a domain-driven kind of design. We're using the same domain objects, which are maps using Hibernate from the database. We use those at the front end as well, so they actually go all the way up the stack. We use Hibernate for GWT, which I think is called Gilead now, to do that. So because, I don't know if you know, but Hibernate has this funny way of doing collections and actually has strange implementations of lists and sets. So if you attempt to use any of that stuff at the front end, it doesn't work. So this Hibernate for GWT actually strips all of that out and just maps it to plain beans so it can be used at the front end, and then reattaches it to the Hibernate model when it comes back. It's quite useful, but so we've made use of that to actually push the database object straight up to the client. So the other thing that we've got in here is we're using property change support, which isn't native to GWT, but it's actually provided by a framework called GWT. So what this is doing is giving you binding kind of capabilities at the front end, so you can actually, when you update a field and at the front end, it will actually push that change back onto the model immediately, and vice versa. So when you load the model again, it will just automatically change on the screen. I'll cover this. There's a few downsides to this as well, which I'll cover in a minute. Also, the MVC type model we've got is based on this GWT framework as well. So we have they call it a view action model. So you basically have a view bound to an action which works on a model. So it's an MVC type structure, and we've put our own flow kind of structure on top of it to allow multi-step processes. So we sort of track the state of a process using these flow steps which move one to the other. So that's how we drive our kind of forms and stuff at the front end. It's quite generic. The other thing in this architecture here, you can see this common layer calling out to CBiz. So that's where that SOAP connectivity is happening. That's the web service call going out to CBiz to retrieve data from the underlying Composer database. The thing with also I should probably mention with the state management, all of our state is essentially client side until it's actually pushed back to the database. So we don't manage state in the HTTP session beyond security. So the actual HTTP session is very lightweight, which is useful because you can cluster the app server then quite easily, because you only have to replicate a very small amount of state between servers. So that's quite useful. And the other thing we've done here, because we have multiple clients which have different look and feel and different business logic, and in some cases completely different processes involved, we've actually split a lot of these modules. So they're managed by Maven, and also we've got obviously GWT modules as well, but we've split a lot of them into a common module and then a client-specific module which lives on top. So this means that we can share a lot of the code between different clients without having to copy and paste things all over the place. So we've kept it quite abstracted like that, and we use Gin to actually inject in the client-specific implementation. So we've got multiple clients running on 80% of the code base being the same, but having completely different functionality in some areas, which is it's been quite good. So I mentioned GWT earlier. This was one of the earliest frameworks that I came across anyway for GWT, hence the name GWT, but it turns out it's not actually as nice as we originally thought. It was quite useful to start with. Actually, before I go any further, has anyone actually heard of this? Yeah, there's the problem, you see. So the issue we had with this is that it hasn't actually been very well maintained. We had to fork it a while back, and we pushed bugs, back into the project, and they don't get applied, and that kind of, we push bug fixes back up, and they don't get applied. So we've had some issues with this framework. So just so you know, this is what provides the property change support, and it also gives some nice kind of bound table, which is very similar to cell table actually, but based on widgets rather than HTML like the new cell table. So it's quite a heavyweight version, but it gives you nice tables that you can bind your data to, and it's all very friendly from a sort of application development point of view, but it tends to be a bit heavy. Really slows down your compilation time as well, because it has to do a lot of code generation to provide the property change support. So yeah, the performance of it can be a bit slow, and we also had some issues originally with bindings not being cleaned up properly. So you visit a screen multiple times, you end up with 20 bindings in there, which is obviously not very quick. But it did get us up and running quite fast, so it was useful initially, but I'd probably steer away from it if you come across it. So sorry if anyone's heard of it. But, so we are transitioning away from that now into just using core GWT capabilities rather than relying on third-party frameworks. There's a lot of third-party frameworks that seem to just get abandoned, so you should be careful if you're starting out that you don't back the wrong one and end up stuck with it. So as I was saying, a lot of this is now in the core. Since 2.1, the editor and the cell table framework in the GWT core offers similar capabilities, but it's much more efficient. The tables themselves are much lighter, and the binding, the code generation appears to be much lighter than what's required for this. But yeah, I'll come on to that in a minute, what some of the changes we're making. So one of the other things you've probably come across if you've done any web development anyway is about not trusting the client, because the issues we've had with I guess with the client is about security, because we're obviously moving our domain model essentially into the client unchanged. So you've got to be very careful around the security of it, because previously you could have, there's injection attacks, like you can have SQL injection attacks. We're pretty much opening ourselves up to object injection attacks, where because our object model is detached and lives directly in the client, you can manipulate that model, and when it comes back, we just blindly persist that into the database. So one of the things we did to secure that is provided interceptors on the Hibernate, in the chain for Hibernate. So as the model comes back, we actually check ownership of parts of the model. So to prevent you, say, detaching part of your model and attaching it to someone else's by just randomly guessing IDs. So we actually check the ownership of the model as it comes back. We walk the tree and make sure that it actually everything you're working on belongs to you, the IDs of it belong to you. Just to make sure you're not attaching things to someone else's model or modifying someone else's. The other thing with security as well, as I said before, the session management is quite lightweight from our point of view. We just use Spring Security to actually manage the HTTP session, and we secure all the URLs. So all the services have distinct URLs, so we use security at that level. We also use method level security, so we've annotated the service methods with different roles. So depending on what role you have different functions that you can access. So the methods themselves are annotated, and the security checks are run at that point when you actually try and make the call through. So it's done down to that level. We also secure against cross-site request forgery, which what we're doing there is using an additional token as a get parameter, and then using the Spring Dispatcher servlet, which is forwarding our request. We actually put a secured version in front of that, which checks this token as it comes in to make sure the request is actually coming from our application and not from another domain or from somewhere else. Cross-site scripting, another potential problem. So this one we've actually avoided any inner HTML manipulation. As part of our code review, we make sure that no one's actually manipulating anything directly, and so we just want to keep that keep that sort of problem away. I think some of the safe HTML stuff in GWT now is quite useful for this, which again we didn't have at the time. The other thing is that we secure the services when they talk through to CBiz as well, so we've got an extra layer there. So if something did manage to get through to the web, we actually secure the service calls. So as the call comes through, we inject credentials into the service call that goes to CBiz, so that goes through underneath. So even though, and those credentials are never seen at the front end, they never go forward into the client to prevent anyone from messing with them. We also have we have WS security available on those services, but we're not using it currently. So we could actually secure it right down to that level as well if we wanted. So obviously being in finance, people get a bit funny about it. Strangely enough, if you lose a load of money. So we've got a full audit trail as well, obviously, a lot of logging. And we've had penetration testing done a couple of times as well, just to make sure things are okay. Although, to be honest, the first time the person that was doing it didn't really understand how the framework worked. So when you're having to explain how it works to them, it's a bit kind of, you're thinking, yeah, okay, do you actually know what you're looking for here? So it wouldn't surprise me if there's holes there, but they just didn't find them anyway. So where do I get to? So that's some of the things we did around security, just to try and keep this stuff secure. The other thing that's might be interesting is the fact that we actually have an integration with Flash on the front end as well, because one of our clients actually wanted to develop their own Flash tools for embedding inside the site. So they have a third party actually developed a series of Flash calculators and things for asset selection and various other things which are used within our process. So at certain points in the processing, the Flash application will launch, and there's then a small JavaScript bridge which actually connects the two together. If I can find my note on it. Yeah, here we go. So the integration here is in two different places. So the first one is around session management, because the Flash application actually has its own server and its own session state to manage. So we have server-side integration, so we have session listeners running in our app server. So every time someone logs in, we actually call the Flash application server, which I don't even know what it is. I think it's IIS probably, but we make a web service call to say, okay, this user is now logged in through Composer Web, so can you just set up your session state on that side? And they can actually call back to us to retrieve session state as well, to know if the session is still active. And we also do the same thing when the session ends. We actually tell them, okay, the session's gone now. So if you're inside the Flash application and the session ends, it can handle that gracefully rather than just carrying on and then getting to the end of the process and bailing. So that's one of the integration points. The other one is on the client side, where we actually wrote a series of native methods. So obviously just native JavaScript wrappers, which we pass across state into the Flash tool. So when we launch the tool, we actually package up some state JSON encoded and give it to the tools, and they then load that state, push it back to their own server, do security checks, do the session check, and then the Flash tools may have several steps that they go through. At the end of that, they then return some state back to us through a similar mechanism. So they use a JavaScript callback, which then comes back into the sort of GWT space, so we can grab that state and update our own database. Obviously, there's a lot of filtering and stuff that goes on because we don't really want them pushing random state back. So that's that was interesting. That's something a bit different. So I've got no idea how long I've been talking for, but I'll keep going for a moment. So some of the future things we're looking at, we've recently looked at the MVP architecture, and we've started moving to that more. So we're actually using presenters, activities, the sort of standard stuff that's going around now. So that's just using standard GWT capabilities, nothing flashy. And this has been quite good because it's improved our testing capabilities. Previously, the GWT components, because they made a lot of use of things that are inside the GWT framework, you couldn't actually unit test them without using a GWT test case. And anyone that's worked on this will know that a GWT test case starts up a mini hosted mode or mini development mode, which then is ridiculously heavy. So your test case that should run in less than a second, it might take 15-20 seconds to run. So by using the presenter, we've actually managed to get away from that. So we can now unit test our front end, which has been quite good. So I definitely recommend looking at that pattern if you're interested. The other thing is it lets us support alternate front ends quite easily, because we can modify our Vue implementation, so we could have a mobile version. As I mentioned earlier, in some cases we've got different versions for different clients. So the same presenter, multiple views based off the same interface. So that's been quite useful. Gin would be another one which we've again found very useful, just to remove some of the spaghetti code at the front end and avoid having to have registries of things to look up. You can actually now just inject things in. I mean, there's a few things that don't work, obviously, because it's compile time, it's not proper runtime, but that's been quite good for our splitting between clients as well, because we can inject in different versions of the same view, as I was saying. So yeah, that's very useful. So if you're thinking of setting up a GWT app, definitely look at using Gin from the outset rather than trying to retrofit it afterwards. The one thing I haven't looked at yet is code splitting in Gin. I think there's some support there, but I haven't actually looked at it. The other thing, as I say, was the editors and cell table. Much better performance cell table, because it's just HTML based. It's not using widgets, so it's a much better way of supporting these large tables of data. As you can imagine, this app has a lot of huge tables of thousands of rows of data in it. That gives much better performance, and also the editing framework has been quite good too. One thing that we did actually have to add for the editing framework, which is not there yet, is we've added some extra validation. So we've actually hooked into the Simple Bean, I think it's called Simple Bean wrapper, and just added some JSR 303. There's a GWT validation framework which we've made use of. So we've hooked into that, which actually does the validation as the editor framework pushes data back and forth. It runs the validation at that point. And then there's a little visitor in there that walks down the tree and actually puts the errors onto the has errors implementations. I hope someone knows what I'm talking about. But so that pushes the errors onto the has errors implementations themselves. It's almost there. I think I've got a feeling it's probably there if you want to go for like tip of trunk, but not really interested in doing that at the moment. So we've extended that a little bit. Hopefully it will still fit once some of this stuff makes its way into the actual releases, because we're trying to hook in as much as we can to the existing stuff that's in there. I think that's about it really. We did look at UI Binder as well, but decided not to use that at the moment. We don't have a lot of HTML expertise in-house, so the thought of actually having to write bits of HTML, even though it's fairly straightforward, but it didn't really appeal. So we're sticking with our model at the moment, which is it behaves more like a Swing application, so it's something that people are more familiar with. That seems to be working okay for us. So yeah, I think that's a lot.
So I'd like to say thank you to Jon. I'm a GWT geek, so this meant something to me. I'm hoping it meant something to other people. And if you don't use UI Binder, I think I'll shoot you.
We can argue about that later.
So any questions? So just because this is being recorded, we're going to be using mics for questions.
Why did you choose GWT, and did it deliver on that promise?
We actually originally chose it because of our lack of JavaScript expertise in-house. When I joined the company, I come from a web development background, but a lot of the rest of the developers from the company had never done anything to do with the web. They'd never touched the web in their lives. So we chose it primarily for that reason, that we could get that nice Ajax, responsive front end without having to actually know too much about JavaScript or teach everyone jQuery or something. So it was that was the main reason. And also not having to sort of context switch from one language to another, just doing something that they're familiar with. And yeah, I think it has delivered on that. It's definitely got a lot better. Initially, development turnaround times were a lot slower than we would have wanted because of the way the development mode worked. And you also couldn't. It does hide a lot of the browser-based issues, but you still get look and feel issues that you need to actually use a real browser for. Which caused us a bit of trouble early on because you couldn't actually use the real browser. But the out-of-process hosted mode, or the dev mode now, has fixed a lot of those issues. So yeah, I think it has delivered. It was a bit of a risk at the time because it was quite young, and I had to fight quite hard to get us to actually use it. And we did evaluate Java server faces at the same time, which obviously seemed to have a bit more support. But I think we probably made the right choice in the end.
So like to thank John, and yeah, I think we'll go straight into Adam's talk.